15 feet away from this guy in a tan Bronco. And I'll never forget it because we saw that very same tan Bronco cruise around the parking lot of the hotel where we all met. And I'm thinking, oh, Christ, okay, here we go, So, but I could see under the bushes, I could see this guy's feet. And it's still a little bit dark out. Sun's coming up in about an hour, and I got to figure some shit out because I'm right there. Now I'm crunched down. They're pulling in, and they're yelling, there's guys running over there. There's guys running over there. We'll go get them. I was squealing, and everybody's running after everybody, All family wherever we went. People talk about cartel this, cartel that. Fuck cartel.
Welcome, 239 Uncensored Everything Southwest Florida and beyond. And we have a really, really neat guest. Let's go over to him real quick. Tim McBride.
Hello.
Tim is Saltwater Cowboy, author of Saltwater Cowboy.
Yes.
And put that book up there for us. Tim reached out to me, Tim, and we're going to talk a lot about the book and obviously a lot of about the life here in Collier County, down in Everglades, Chuckaluski.
Late 70s through the 80s-ish when it was, Dodge City.
It was wild down there. It was before I got here a little bit. I got here in early 90, 91, 92. But we had a good phone conversation a couple weeks ago, and you actually stumbled across one of our podcasts, Captain Tom Storer, super guy, one of my best friends. Yes. You called and we had a great conversation, and you're like, hey, what the captain said was it was pretty legit, but I got some really good stuff.
Right.
And how'd that go?
We mentioned to one another at the time, he's spot on with regards to, from his version of what took place. And at that period of time, he was talking about, a lot of plane landings out in what we called the tram, the estates out off of Everglades Boulevard that they developed, in lieu of trying to get the city to go that direction. So they were abandoned roads for the longest time. I mean, a lot of them still are. There was no connection between Everglades Boulevard to get across I-75 or Alligator Alley to get to that section. So a lot of those roads, there was nobody living out there. So you could put smudge pots down those roads and land planes. And that's what they were doing in those days. But basically, through his reign, which was, I guess predominantly through the 70s and late 70s, the Colombians at that time, the people dealing with the Cubans in Miami. And a lot of times the Colombians never dealt with the Cubans directly. There was always somebody in the middle like myself, like a gringo, because they just couldn't work together.
Right.
I mean, it was a bloodbath.
Yeah, because I know that not all Latinos think of themselves as all one, right?
They don't trust one another,
right.
Particularly when it comes to something such as this, But that's another story, that involves, how I got him, in the position that I wound up finding myself in. But what he described, pretty much, I mean, that's the way they used to, they'd fly it in. They'd use the bigger DC-10s where you could get 10, 12,000 pounds on them. DC-3s, the maximum weight, and I've got a story in my book that talks about these three guys, chunging in from Santa Marta with 6,000 pounds. And that's the limit on a DC-3. That's loaded down with, all the fuel you can carry plus the cruise weight. And you're just there barely at flight limits.
Yeah. For those that didn't maybe hear the first presentation with Captain Tom Storer, right?
Right.
We're talking about Collier County. We're talking about this place being probably one of the biggest places that drugs were coming into.
It was dubbed the hub of marijuana smuggling in North America.
Yeah,
is what it's been dubbed.
So primarily marijuana.
Yeah, primarily marijuana.
In your days.
Yeah, because what we were doing, and the reason why the story is as likable as it is, particularly with a lot of the supervisors for the federal agencies that were involved in our capture, in these different operations, and I can think of 4 right off the top of my head who are really dear friends of mine right now.
That's interesting, right?
Interesting in that they understood ultimately what we represented with regards to that industry. I mean, never did I ever see a gun as a kid? Never. I mean, that's just the way it was. We were family and generational. I was what the government described as a 3rd generation potholer. That meant that my friends and I learned from their fathers, uncles, and older cousins. They in turn learned from the generation before them, who first generation being a legend, which you may have heard this gentleman's name, Lauren Touch Brown.
Right. Yeah.
He is an absolute legend in Everglades, not specifically for that. He kind of renounced that toward the end of his, in his later years, but more for his family being one of the founding families of Chuckaluski. island, which was back in those days, the only way that they got their supplies and mail was by sailboat from Key West. So he grew up there, and he learned that area. And, and when you learn how to eke a living out of an island among 10,000 islands, take your average
That's
Joe.
Conservative estimate.
Take your average Joe and throw him out there in the middle of 41 between Miami and Everglades and say, go ahead, make a living. How the hell do you do that? But these people did it. But being that said, Toch wound up, involving some of the second generation, which wound up being the Daniels brothers. There was 5 of them. And they reluctantly jumped on board. And, as the story goes, the youngest brother was one of Toch's dearest friends, and Toch taught him. And their thinking in those earlier days, and we're talking like 78, 79, around in there, even maybe as early as 77, these guys jumping on board, and saying, look, they were afraid that, you work with these Cuban guys, they just as soon kill you than pay you. Yeah. Well, as it turned out, nothing would be further from the truth. So Craig's coming home with these suitcases full of money and throwing it on the kitchen table. And the brothers are like, they want to shun him from the family. They don't want anything to do with that. And he's like, at least take something and buy your kids some bicycles or something, because it's, this is just the way it is. Well, reluctantly, over a period of time, they all relented and wound up coming on board. They became the second generation. They learned from Toch and his friends and that. Now, Toch blazed the trail. He was I don't say he was a founding father of cannabis coming into this country, because there were a lot of people discovering it and figuring it out themselves. But he started massing, working with the Cubans in Miami, coming through the Mona and the Windward Passes, which are the east of the Yucatan Pass. The only 2 ways to get from the Caribbean into, the Bahamian waters in the Leeward Islands is come through the Mona or the Windward Pass. And they started coming into Miami. And they were having, a little bit of difficulty, because all of a sudden that became the cocaine traffickers' way of coming through the Caribbean, was through those 2 major passes. The only way to get, beyond Haiti and Dominican Republic and the Virgin Islands was to go through one of those 2 passes. And they had to monitor it. They're not hard to monitor.
Right. You can shut those corridors down.
Yeah. So what Toch finally wound up telling these guys was, after trial and error, and he didn't go down there his first time, get loaded and come home. He had to find the shit. Find out what to pay for, what to pay the locals, how to process it, how to package it, how to get the boat there on time to get it back to here. There was a lot of trial and error over several years for him to finally figure this out. And once he did, he opened up this corridor. And when that corridor became plugged up with the cocaine cowboys in Miami started, that was about the time when cocaine started becoming prevalent. He said, well, look here, bring this shit on over here. This is our backyard. This is 10,000 islands. We get it in there. We own the shit. So that started the marijuana, Caribbean marijuana, coming into Southwest Florida through the Everglades in the 10,000 islands.
Now, let me ask you this too. So it goes back to being able to, so you can get it offshore in the 10,000 islands, but you have to know what the heck you're doing to get it into the drop-off points, right? To where you could get it on a truck and get it out of there.
Right. Well, the scenario, as I'm about to impart it to you, is how I did it in the book. And it tells you, I tell you.
First, I'll put the book up one more time. I'm actually currently reading or listening to the audio book, but you got to get this book. And Tim is great in it, right? He has, a little uncensored view on it, but we got it.
Yeah,
but when you get it on Amazon, download it on Audible. It's
it's a Kindle. There's an MP3 disc,
great,
for it. It's in its second printing. This is one of the very rare hardcover editions that is a personal edition of mine that's never been opened past the second page, which makes it a rather valuable score. Plus, I can autograph it and sign it, and there are people selling books that don't even have the fucking paper cover on them for $250.
Wow.
Because it's a rare, if they don't print, there's no more. You can't find them anymore.
Right. Unbelievable.
I have 5 of them at home that I'm hanging on to, probably till my deathbed
for sure
or something. But that being said, it takes you through what you began to talk about. You take it from what what was described and even still is to this day, a mothership.
Right. Mothership offshore. About how far offshore would they go?
30-mile-ish,
Okay.
maybe 32, like that, because that's the territorial water limits are right there. And
Now,
to get them to come in any closer, it was always a trick to try to do.
Right.
You know, but there was an area out there, and it was very unique, if you will, for doing what we were doing now. During those years and some of the earlier years, there were wars, literally stone crabbers shooting at shrimpers because the shrimpers are coming inshore. And if they manage to somehow get on one of your trap lines, you know, and our stone crab traps in our boat alone, hard times, we had 6,000 stone crab traps.
Wow.
And, you know, they're about yay big by about this deep by about 20 something inches like this. But the bottom 6 or 7 inches of it's concrete. And these fuckers weigh like 50 pounds or better. And I dropped one, there's 2 pullers on the back of the boat. We're taking out traps and laying them out in what we call lines. 300 going one direction for 17, 20 miles. You skip over 50, 75 yards and you pull the other 20 miles back so you're not twice as far away from where you started in order to get 600 traps pulled. And this is how we worked back and forth like this. So the boat designed for hauling crab traps to the grounds to where we're taking them is perfectly designed for stacking bales of pot on, and it just happened, that's just how it happened,
I mean, how many bales are we talking? I know people want to know that. So when you go out, you meet the mothership.
Right.
How many boats normally? And I know I'm kind of getting into is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 can pull off that?
There could be as many as 3. I've seen as many as 3 large. And we had a 51-foot marine management, which is a bow forward wheelhouse with bunks in the bow in the wheelhouse, and the entire 2/3 of the boat is deck for stacking the traps onto. So that gives you that entire deck. That gives you around the sides by the windows and on the bow, and up on the roof we stack it just high enough for the radar to turn.
Gotcha.
You put 40,000 pounds on this boat. And it starts to take it down like this into the water. And any more than that, you have to start plugging what's called the scupper holes.
Right, because that's where
those go underwater, dude. So does the boat. So we were very cognizant about being careful, keep an eye on the scuppers, and we knew about where the water was with the scuppers about relative to how much we had on the boat.
So visually, you didn't worry about anybody even seeing you.
No.
It's all you wouldn't see boats at all down there. No enforcement.
No. I mean, that's when I talked talked to this, Sergeant Sorters is his name, like
Captain Store. Yeah.
Captain Store. Where in the hell were you guys? But that being said, it would take 2 or 3 boats sometimes because the boats that we're approaching and we're depending on where in the Caribbean they're coming from, whether it be Jamaica, Venezuela, Colombia, Central America, Belize, Honduras, or someplace like that. I've seen boats out there, freighters actually, with as much as 200,000 and 300,000 pounds of Caribbean weed on them. And we would go out 2 or 3 nights in a row just to get 3 boats, just to get this freighter unloaded.
So the freighter would be sitting out there.
But see, what I was going for earlier is the fact that because of this war that was going on between the shrimpers and the crabbers, they ultimately came upon a divider line. You don't come within 30 miles of the shoreline and you won't interfere with our stone crabbing, and we won't go beyond that and risk our stone crabs and our buoys being scooped up and goobled up and thrown into piles of 100 that you'll never get apart, by shrimp boats. So we made that boundary. So when you look at the radar at night during season, you see hundreds of dots out there of fish boats, of shrimp boats of different sizes. That's where the mothership sits among all those radar blips.
Right. And looking back, probably in those days, with the captain, they probably didn't have the resources to go out in mass. I know we had Coast Guard, right?
Right. Yeah.
But there
was Coast Guard, but down as far as we were,
right, you're
on the shoreline.
Yeah.
I mean, we're getting down to where there was 2 Marine Patrol officers in town.
Yeah.
One worked the evening and one worked in the after, during the day. And we knew where they were at all times because it doesn't take it but send somebody outside their house and keep an eye on it.
Well, and that brings up the point I told you earlier that you didn't know, but I was in the Florida Marine Patrol a little bit later in 1990. Right. So when I went to the academy,
did they give you a heads up?
They give me a heads up. But like I told you, I had some boating experience, but not boating experience to navigate, down in the 10,000 islands.
Right.
That's how all that works. I used to hear engines, and I used to hear motors offshore. Maybe that some of the drug dealing was still going on, but a lot of them out there fishing, crabbing, things like that.
Well, if you ask me if they're absolutely out of their fucking minds, because when it came time, and we'll get to how it all came down, for us as kids, we'll get to that, and how stringent the law became. I mean, almost overnight, they were giving out mandatory minimum sentences of one indictment was a 40-year mandatory to life.
Yeah.
And that happened. We didn't even know it took place, so that's how they decided that, the punishment that they were, handing out prior to that wasn't having the desired effect, that they hoped it would.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting story about that as well. But I want to get back to the bringing this stuff back into shore.
Let's bring that up here.
We go out in several of these large crab vessels, and we'll take on 20 tons. We won't take on nearly as much as, like the capacity that we could. We need a little bit of running time. We need to be able to run, because everything that goes offshore and comes onshore has to be done between sundown and sunup. So we run off, we start loading these boats. We'll get 20 tons, they'll get 20 tons, and the other boat will get 20 tons. So we've got 60 tons of shit coming in on 3 boats. And I have seen it at one time that every house that had a dock and that was on the water on Chokoloskee, 129-acre island, had pot in it.
Just loaded up.
We would bring it inshore on our big boats, and there's like you alluded to, the boats coming through the Caribbean. Of course, it's hidden below deck, obviously. But when it gets offshore, the crews on the boats that we're going to meet, our crews get on top of those vessels and help them get it up and on deck, so we can get down below and help. They throw it and we can stack it. So we're inside their boat and they bilge, working our asses off. And this is not, go out there and, hey, dude, how you doing? This kind of shit. It's like, just get this shit off the boat and get it into shore. And you work and you haul bales and you throw a bale, you puke, and then you throw some more bales. That's just how, and then you take your turn in and out of the hole because it's hot down there. That stuff is becoming to heat. It's becoming to heat up like self-combust does.
Fermenting.
Exactly. And it's dusty, and it's, it's just, and the engines are running 24/7 in these freighters. They don't turn them off. That's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get enough on deck that we
Do you remember it? Like in your mind right now, we're talking about it.
I'm feeling it. I'm smelling it. I'm watching my skin turn brown from the resin dust that's floating through the air in the bilge of these boats, because we didn't realize this till after a few days of working. We got home to take a shower, and I got my shit off, and I've got a farmer tan. I haven't been in the sun. And when I took my shorts and my boots off, I was almost black. And it took about 4 days of showering before that stuff started to come off, because, cannabis resin isn't water soluble.
Right.
It's oily, So then I looked like, it didn't come off all at once. It was coming off in patches, but that's just exposure to, that's just part of the game that we play.
Right.
But we get it on our boat and we chug it into shore, and we're not doing any more. And that boat's not doing 4 knots. We got 30 miles or so to go, and we've got, we usually start about 3 or 4 hours prior to sundown. So we've got a little bit of time through the sun to get oriented and get the load starting coming down. So we've got plenty of time to get into shore, because we have to get it into shore. And when we reach the outer edge of the 10,000 islands, we kill our engines. That's when 25, 30, and 40 of these smaller, shallow drafting boats come out, and like flies on a garbage can. They come up, 2 guys on a boat.
They're like mullet skiff type of thing.
Well, in the earlier days, when the older generations were working as kids, as asses off, there were a lot of mullet skiffs, because they were the shallow drafters.
Right.
And they were using what was called a T-craft.
The Morgan.
And Boo and his brother we were making custom boats with those guys, and I don't want to drag them too much further into this, but they were making boats that were specifically designed for what it is we were doing.
Right.
And it's funny you should mention that, because most people aren't privy to that. The Morgan, Morgan brothers.
When you're in the Marine Patrol, they give you just enough nuts and bolts to like say that might be one. That
Yeah,
might be one. And,
yeah,
and again, I got the back end of it.
glance over there every now and then.
Yeah, glance over there.
That's great.
But when you work down there, you're by yourself. So it's not like you're just gonna go out there and roll. You got to be careful.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because it's like you, me, the water, and jail. So
well, what people need to understand with regards to the geography of where it is we're talking about, the 10,000 islands. And if you Google this, you will see for yourself exactly what it was that the law enforcement had to contend with. And this was literally Mother Nature built this wonderful labyrinth in our backyard. And this is where we goofed off and played and ran around as kids. And we knew this fucking place like we knew it, like your own backyard.
Yeah.
And it's all done by visual cue. You got to remember, turn at this,
treetop,
turn at this.
Light.
And it's always changing, because they're mangrove islands, and any significant storm event that takes place, an island's going to shift or change. So if you're not always constantly running through these passes and creating these little areas to get through and get out of, if I went down there today,
it would be totally changed.
We'd probably still be there. But, ironically enough, a lot of my buddies have turned to being guides and backwater guides and, swamp buggies and airboat tours and that kind of stuff. And they're using the areas and then the little cutouts and haunts that we used to use as smugglers through that, to get from one little area to another. And it's pretty funny that they should be doing that. Yeah. But once those little boats grab it from us, they take it and they make as many trips through the islands. And we're talking about 25 or 30 mile stretch of coastline that is speckled with literally 10,000 plus islands. And at its deepest point, from outside to the inside, where Chokoloskee was an inner island, you're probably talking about 3 miles of waterway you got to navigate through to get to the main island. And that's where the shit's going, because we have a crew standing there on the dock, the bail handlers, standing at somebody's house, where we literally pull those T-crafts or those Morgans or those well boats up there and start throwing the bales, and they start running them and stacking them in this house where we've literally taken all the furniture out of. Seriously. And stack it full to the brim, from the dining room, kitchen, bedroom, living room, closets, bathrooms, and get to the front door and shut it. And if there's more coming, move to Teddy's house next door and start filling that one. And it was just literally how it happened. And the drivers who drive this shit, and this is why we were considered masters of hide in plain sight. The stuff come in at night from sundown to sun up. By the time the sun comes up, it's in that house, it's closed, doors closed, and everybody's off at home sleeping or whatever. And that's when the cars and the vans and the trucks and the Broncos with the blacked out windows and stuff start showing up, at intervals, because now the shore crew and everybody working and we had over 200 of these 2-meter radio.
Okay.
With the 5-digit combination, which at that time were virtually unscannable.
Right.
And we could just pick a combination and everybody just talk. If you had a problem, you talk and you told, because communication was key. So what they were doing was, now while we're loading that.
Not to cut you off, but was there any time where like the police were coming and you guys had to let everybody know that, or you just don't remember a lot of that?
No, there was never. Surprisingly enough, it never.
Obviously, how you get into Everglades and then get into Chokoloskee,
right?
By the time you get there, it's
there had been actually one point in time when,
just curious about all that,
we were ready to bring in. I think it was nearly 40,000, nearly 22 tons of stuff. And we're getting it off our boats and bringing it through with the little boats, and we're headed to Chokoloskee with it. When one of the guys on the island, we got spotters all over Everglades, in the island, and are you familiar with the tower?
I've heard in the air
in Everglades City, the observation tower.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was one of the 3 people that built that fucking thing.
Really?
For Ernest Hamilton, he was a legend also.
Yeah,
Hamilton Stonecraft. And his son-in-law, Billy Potter, the captain of my boat, and myself, Clark, who is actually Mark in the book, the first mate. I'm second mate.
Right.
We worked with one of the volunteer firefighters who was of the Mitchell family living in Everglades, who constructed and engineered it. And we actually built that fucking thing. We'd have somebody sitting.
How convenient.
We had somebody sitting up in it. I mean, you can see the island all the way to Everglades from up there. But That being said, it turned out one evening that there was just too much unsuspected traffic going on and off the island, and we decided to stick it in the woods overnight.
Just hold.
And in the earlier days, they built what they described as $1 million pad. And by that, I mean, they would find as high a ground within the islands that they could find at that time, depending on the tide, and start laying bales down on the ground and then stack the whole load onto a pyramid. I mean, in the middle of on an island in the middle of nowhere, and then come back the next night or the next night after that, and then load it back on the boats and bring it in when it was clear to bring it in. But the material that was on the bottom that they stacked everything on, depending on how the tide come up or how dirty or muddy it got, it was left behind. That was the $1 million pad.
That was it.
I mean, and today, and the prices as the years went on, it was probably $2 million worth of shit that was just
sitting there,
just left there because it got muddy.
Right. That's crazy.
When we started coming in, and this is in answer to your question, did I ever, oh yeah, there was a point in time in which we had to put the shit in the woods because we couldn't bring it onto the island how we had anticipated. But we didn't use the $1 million pad technique. We went off and started breaking down dead branches and dead pine trees and dead mangroves and building platforms in order to bucket brigade this stuff through chest deep water and put it on these pads that we built to keep it out of the water. I mean, we broke our asses to do this. I mean, it was not fun and games.
Was there any way that you could pull a bale off and not turn, I mean, I imagine there was, right? Or how was the inventory controlled? Was there any, because like you said, a lot of that stuff is.
Yeah, interesting question. No, and that comes into play when I get, say, okay, let's skip forward to me.
I know it's hard to stay in.
Skip forward to me. There were two ways in which this worked. You could pay me $175 a pound, and I could go to Jamaica, Central America, or Colombia or South America and buy whatever it is you wanted, however much you wanted, for $10 a pound. And by the time that $10 a pound shit reached United States territorial waters, it just jumped to $500 to $750 a pound. So
that's
depending on, what way they wanted me to do it. And there was another way with $145 a pound. You go get your own shit from wherever you got a connection, whatever. You get it out here offshore from us. We'll take it and grab it and put it on your doorstep for $147. Well, most of them always opted for me to just do the whole thing, $175, and go buy it, go get it, go bring it, and put it on your doorstep like that. Well, the way it works is, and a lot of common misconception is you bring this shit in, you take it to Miami, and you give it to the actual owners, and they pay you. Well, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
we need to get paid as soon as that load starts to sell. They have to generate the money in order to pay for that load out of that load. So it could be 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks or so before I even see any money out of that. So if I brought, say,
like big bags of money, I mean, I read the book, but
thousands of pounds of money, literally. We wound up having to, and I get to that at some point, wound up having to stop counting it and start weighing it.
Right.
Because we were literally weighing thousands of pounds of cash. Because my paydays went from, that first test run that I worked with my 2 Cuban partners in Miami. My first test run, they wanted me to go to Colombia, pick it out, buy it, make sure it was good shit, and get it back here for them, and do the whole thing from A to Z. That's how, I don't know if you got to that section yet, but how I met the boss.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. You got some good stories. You got to read the book. I'd give it up.
Yeah.
You got to read the book.
This is true Southwest Florida history.
And a gringo going to Colombia. I've been there before.
Yeah.
It wasn't for that. It was Cartagena for the beach,
right,
and a wedding. But
I was
not easy to do.
No. Plus, when you're situated in a mansion that's on the side of a mountain between Cartagena and Barranquilla Peninsula, Barranquilla City, and then the next is Santa Marta. So he's got growers between Cartagena and Santa Marta that he can pull from, because we're talking about literally taking mountainsides of Colombian weed from these people. As fast as I could send boats to go get this shit was how fast it was coming out of there. I mean, it was ridiculous. At one point, there were so many boats parked out here waiting to get offloaded. It was like a parking lot, and that's why I don't want to take anything away from Mr. Storter, but hey, dude, you have to understand the significance of what it was taking place. And what you saw by way of the aircraft and things like that were just these guys trying to get these one little bits of shit in, getting themselves caught up with law enforcement, and we're thinking, even back then, I don't know how, well, you said you got here in the 90s. If you remember, Port of the Islands used to be called Remuda Ranch.
Mm-hmm.
Remuda Ranch.
Don't remember the name of that one, but I remember
Remuda Ranch at that time wasn't a whole full-blown condominium complex type of thing. It was a hotel and a not really nice restaurant and a bar that we all, if we wanted to go out, we'd go there, or we'd go to the Lions.
Come up the city.
Lions.
Port of the Islands.
Yeah, Port of the Islands. But it was owned by a couple of Colombian dudes.
Okay.
And they were landing their shit on that private airstrip right there. Well, that came to an end,
right.
But not just across the street damn near. It was the tram where all those roads we're talking about were. So they just started landing them over there. And that's when, the gentleman that we're speaking of starts talking about those particular stories and how those, those guys were stupid enough to do shit like that.
They drop the plane. The plane stays.
Leave the plane. You make 8 times, 10 times what that plane's worth. I did that with boats. I've done that with boats. A couple of buddies in mine would get in and go in on a boat, $300,000 a piece, buy a yacht, send it to Belize, and buy some really primo stuff, maybe 1,000, 2,000 pounds of it. Bring it back, take the boat offshore, and blow the bottom out of it and sink it. Gone.
I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit.
Jump away.
But is it true? And I've heard this forever, that there's a lot of holes in behind houses in Everglades, buried money.
That I would very much doubt.
Yeah.
To be quite honest.
But I remember even going down there in the early 90s. I mean, you had a little houses, Chokoloskee, Everglades, but they had these badass trucks.
Oh, yeah.
And they save some money. Right. Folks down there save some money. Well,
see, the thing of it is, and people need to also realize that stone crabbing and that in and of itself is a very lucrative job.
Right.
I mean, we were pulling stones. Like I said, we had 6,000 in them fucking things. We're pulling 600 a day, going to 600 here, 600 there, 600 there at all different depths and different lines of traps that are pulled in a similar fashion as if most of you people, I'm sure, have seen a show called Deadliest Catch.
Right.
And they're pulled up the traps in a very similar fashion. Only we're not throwing a grapple hook between two giant bags that's holding a rope. We're reaching out with what's called a catch pole. Yeah, I'm freezing your gnarlies. We're reaching out with a homemade, everybody makes their own what's called a catch pole, the pullers. And you just grab the buoy and the line, pull it through the block and tackle. And that thing that spins, even on that big crab boat, that thing that's spinning is this big around there because they're pulling rope. They're pulling 5/8 inch rope. And what it does is, quite literally, is shaped like a pie pan, like this. And it grabs the rope between it. And as it turns, it cinches that rope and pulls on it. But down here at the bottom is a little thing sticking out like that kicks the rope back out so it doesn't continue to roll around that block. They put theirs in a coiler and it coils it back up for them. Ours are just coiling at our feet because we're using at the most 60 feet of line.
Right.
Because you don't want to fish in any deeper water than that, because now you're offshore. Now it takes forever to pull a fucking trap.
Right.
But that being said, and the similarities with which the work was being done, doesn't take away from the fact that it is ball breaking friggin' work, man. And you had to do this work during the day, and then go off at night and move 800 or 1,000 bales that weigh 70 to 80 pounds a piece. You had to do the work during the day in order to work at night, because that boat just couldn't pay for itself by sitting there. You had to show catch. You had to show it working. You had to do one to do the other. And if that fishing didn't make a man out of you, unloading them damn freighters offshore make a fucking man out of you in a hurry.
That's crazy.
But
so you went through all that time. Let's talk a little bit about how they caught you and how that life was a little bit, and kind of bring it full circle around to how you're doing today. And like you said, you're still super friends with people that were out there chasing you down.
Yeah, and the simple reason for that is, and the likability about the story is simply the fact that we were family and generational. And people have a hard time understanding, how could you get your children involved in such a thing? Because they have this this misconception about how it could take place. And it's not to say there wasn't any violence by other pothaulers here or over there or wherever. Of course there was, because they've got all their money tied up into this thing. And you screw with it, you fuck with it, and you lose it. They're coming after it. They're getting pissed. Well, when you're buying this shit for $10 a pound, you literally take some cocaine cowboy's money to the Caribbean, $300,000, which even to us was a weekend of, long weekend of bar money. and buy 30,000 pounds of Colombian redbud. And by the time it gets to his doorstep, it's worth $500 minimum a pound. I just turned 300,000 into 15 million. Wow. Minus my fee and my crew's fee for a job that size, which is about 5 million. You just made $10 million in 8 days off of 300 grand. You think these fuckers are shooting at me? They can't give me money to go back fast enough.
Right.
You know, because if you take that math and you divide that that original $300,000 into 9,700,000, you come up with the number 32. And what that number 32 represents is the number of chances I have to get your next load in. I can lose the next 31 loads, but I get that 32nd load in, they still made money. They haven't lost money.
Wow.
That's the ridiculousness of the price in not just the prices, but the reason why there's no violence involved. And not only that, if you think about it, what parent in their right mind would subject their kids to going offshore and meeting Colombian freighters and Jamaican freighters or Central American freighters if they ever thought they were going to get shot at? There is no parent in the right mind that would allow that to happen.
Don't know, but they knew.
But what they had to understand is that the people that I was turned on to, the inheritance that I got throughout the Caribbean, were families as well. The guy I knew in Colombia that I bought literally millions of pounds of Colombian redbud and gold from, his father built the plantation and the home that he lives in, and he was family and generational as well. His father worked with the older generations that we all learned from, so it was all family wherever we went. People talk about cartel this, cartel that. Fuck cartel. You know, they're too busy dealing with cocaine. You know, when they found out that you could move this much and make just as much money moving this much as you can moving this much, you know, they pretty much backed out of that shit
on that one, right? Yeah.
You know, so, but we had the ability and the capability and the wherewithal to still handle the cannabis and the marijuana, and there was still a lot of profit in it. So that being said, how to get to where I wind up jumping in and taking over the spot was that not why a section in a book where I wrote that we had worked 28 nights in a row. Our crew did.
I remember that.
And I did a rough estimate. This is just out of my mind calculation to the tune of about 1.6 million pounds in 28 nights went across that 120-acre island. Wow. And during one of those nights, we moved, like I said earlier, 55 tons, which was 110,000 pounds, and put it in like 9 houses all at once. So that ended my 3-day streak. So I was taking a couple of days off. And like a dummy, I walk over and to one of the houses that's being unloaded. And a lot of times, if, what would happen is the drivers, are never the owners are never the drivers.
Right.
The owners are never the owners of the vessels that are being used. And there's a reason for that. The owners would come out while the house is being loaded the night before, load their van, their truck, or whatever like that, if they could, and drive it back into town and park it in the front yard and just go in the house and leave it loaded. And then on the 2-meter radio the next day, they would get their driver and, tell them, okay, it's time to go. And they would know where in Miami to go. We would usually go off of Chrome Avenue somewhere near Kendall.
Right.
Not as far as Homestead. That's too far to go. But we were like in the Kendall area.
Is it Redlands, or that's a little bit too far?
Too far.
Yeah,
too
so
far.
right,
We were
Kendall
more
area.
like Kendall Drive, Kendall. There's a lot of plazas and a lot of little strip malls right there.
Right.
And what we would do is the cars and the trucks and everything that was loaded would be go over and meet at that chosen strip mall, get out of it and go window shop while one of our guys and a Cuban partners that actually owned the shit would point the vehicle out. And we developed what law enforcement now calls a dead drop. Our guys get out, go window shop. Their guy gets in it, go and loads it and brings it back. The reason for that being is that the guy that drove the shit from Everglades didn't load the fucker. The owner did. So he doesn't know where the shit's at. Now, he doesn't know where it's going in Miami. And the guys in Miami can't tell him where it's coming from in Everglades. So there's always a buffer there.
Always a buffer. Yeah.
But when they did this 110,000 pounds, I can vividly remember 3 days prior to us working again, that 3-day session, one of the boss man, Daryl, handed me and buddy Jimmy a chainsaw and a wrecking bar and pointed to a brand new Winnebago that they just bought, had 120 miles on it. He says, I want you guys to go in that Winnebago and strip everything out of it from the windows down.
Wow.
I mean, leave the curtains in the cabinets and all that shit, but everything from below, I mean, rip it out of there. So we took everything, even the captain's chairs. There was nothing to sit in. And they
flattened it out.
They put airbags in the springs, inflated them. So they put 11,500 pounds of bales in this thing, right up to the bottom of the windows. And when you look at this thing, you can see the curtains, and it just looks like a normal Winnebago. Now the bags, it's not slumped, it's riding stock like it should. And for the driver, we just pulled a bale out so he could sit there between and drive this fucking thing, right? Well, I get over there and Daryl spots me. I just made $75,000 that night.
In a night.
Jeez. Daryl, and I'm 20.
Back then.
Oh, Jesus.
That's like crazy money now.
Yeah, I mean,
probably putting about $1 million in your pocket for the night.
Probably an average of 7 years' pay to an average, white collar worker.
I remember as a deputy, I made $20,000 a year. No, 19.5.
Yeah,
when I first started.
I've lost my wallet with that much.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
No, but
2 ways to go, right?
It's like Paul McCartney. I lost my wallet. I had $1 billion in. Oh well.
Yeah, exactly.
But what wound up happening was, they loaded this fucking thing, and I decide, okay, my day off, I'm gonna go over and see how things are happening at the house and this. And then Daryl sees me, Timmy, and he goes like this, come here. He says he got a favor he wants to ask of me, and I went right away. I went, oh shit. Long story short, he wants me to drive this thing to Miami.
Oh shit! Yeah,
because it can't go to the drop point, because you get within 40 feet of this thing and you can smell it, right? So it had to go straight to the house that nobody had ever been to. Nobody in any crew in Southwest Florida that hauled pot to Miami for these guys ever met the other crew, ever met the other bosses. Only the big dudes did,
right?
So I had to take this thing to that house and spend the day with these people. And he said, I need somebody that I can absolutely trust to do this, because I need you to be there all day. When the load stops, then you bring a car full of money home for me. Okay, whatever. So I did that. Well, stayed over there, and I'm guided by the radio, and they take me down Chrome Avenue, almost to Homestead, and they make a right-hand turn, and I go like 4 miles down this orchard road in the middle of nowhere in these orchards, and all of a sudden out props this medieval castle looking house that some Cuban didn't have brains enough to, other than to build a castle, because he wanted one, I guess,
castle.
And I pull up along next to it, and I get out, and they start putting the shit under the house like this. So I go in the house and I spend the day, playing poker and shit, and I drive this thing back, and Daryl pays me. And it wasn't too long after that, several weeks or so, came Operation Everglades 2. Okay. That was in 1984.
Okay.
That's when, the operation was significant of a success this time. The first one flopped. They did Operation, I don't know if Mr. Storter told you this, but the first Operation Everglades 1 took place in 1983.
Okay.
Over 250 federal agents from every branch of law enforcement descended on that little 2-island town of less than 500 people, and were going to effect arrests. Well, because they had senators, congressmen, and judges on their payrolls, they knew 2 weeks before this happened that they were coming. So there was nothing
clean.
It was nobody around of any significance. So it was a failure. It was pretty much a flop. So here, a year to the day almost, here comes Operation Everglades 2. And this is now when the adults said, screw it. 2 a.m. they're sitting there on the front porch waiting for the show to start, smoking cigarettes. And then here they come. This is when there were more reporters came to that island than there were people to be arrested.
Wow.
And Life magazine was one of the reporting papers there. And they wrote, this is what the front page looked like. And when you get into the very center of it, you come across, let me see if I can find it right here.
Oh yeah, look at that.
This is
Trouble
Life magazine that says Trouble in Everglades City. And then this little line underneath it says, a small Southwest Florida town tarred with drug smuggling, and most of its 600 residents say, so what?
That is crazy.
And it goes on for an unprecedented, even for Life magazine, 18 pages of an article that describes a small town that is now mostly women and children and young men, because the entire adult male population went to prison.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is that so? When I got there, And so I worked in Immokalee 2 days a week, and I worked in Everglades City 3 days a week. And it was the first time I ever been. I was a police officer, and I was teaching DARE at the time.
Oh, okay.
So I'd go into the elementary school and be starting to teach DARE, and I'm probably about I don't know, roughly 10 years out of from when things are really happening.
Right.
Not even maybe that long, but. And the kids were just not having the likings for the deputy,
They
right?
weren't listening.
You put my dad in jail. I was like, I wasn't here, But
right.
It's just, but after we warmed up, and I think things have obviously changed over the times. But I remember school teachers were involved, and people told me stories about this teacher did this teacher did that.
Right. Well, when you stop to consider a town of in Life magazine said 600 people, but even today the population isn't 500.
Like five.
It's not even 500 people because, damn, there's only so much between the two islands. There's so much real estate.
Right.
You can only get so many people there.
Jam it in there.
And any more than that, you'd just be stacking them on top of one another and building condos and shit like that. But it remains small, and even to this day. But you're right, and that's what during that time kind of helped in a way for us to identify who was who. If you came into town and weren't recognized, everybody knew you were there. Everybody knew what was taking place.
You just don't arrive in Everglades.
No.
Because you go to the store, and within 2 minutes, everybody's wondering. I remember being a police officer down there. It was a tough mission.
Oh yeah.
Earl Hall was the principal.
C.W. Sanders.
Yeah.
He wasn't Charlie wasn't a stupid man.
No.
But you had to be able to prove.
Yeah, of course.
You had to see it in order to prove that it was taking place, and that was something he could never do.
Yeah, it's tough.
And guys would taunt him with brand new trucks. They'd go by him banging. I said, "No, got another one by you, CW."
Yeah,
and just screwing with him like that. But he was just the dearest man. He actually helped me when the property my trailer that I purchased was sitting on. I had to move a trailer. He was a handyman. He was liked by just about everybody in town. God bless his soul.
Jack of all trades.
Yeah.
So where are you now?
Okay, back what happened. What wound up happening is after having met these characters over in Miami.
I want these people to get the book.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What wound up happening after meeting these characters and these Cubans, the counterparts in Miami, after the Operation Everglades 2 took place, and that was pretty significant operation when anybody who was visible at that time wound up going to prison. Over 250 people from Miami to Everglades to Kentucky were taken during that operation. But what the law wasn't taking into consideration, simply because they didn't have a clue, was that the infrastructure was still in place. The adults weren't the ones out there handling these 800 and 1,000 bales 2 and 3 times a night. It was the kids doing that. And they had no idea that this was how it was set up. That the third generation was us kids, and the infrastructure was still there. So when George came back, "Hey, Timmy, man," they found me. It took them 3 weeks to find Timmy, was all they knew, and what I looked like. So it took them almost a month to find me, and they came to my house. I get a knock on the door, and there's this guy George I met at that house, and he goes, "Timmy, we got work to do." He says, "Just backing up. Can you do this?"
Right.
And I didn't hesitate. I said, "Bill, yeah." Not even giving it a thought, because I knew the process and every position that was used throughout the entire, sequence of events it takes to do something as sophisticated as we were doing. But what I didn't know at that time was, where in the hell do I go? Who do I talk to? What country to go to? How much do I, and I had to find several of the older generations to get together and say, "Tell me how this is done." And that's how the connections in the Caribbean were inherited to me. About who to talk to. This is who you talk to. This is the price you pay. And
you don't just walk up and go, "Here I am."
Yeah, no.
I'm ready.
No. And people ask me, "How did a Midwest guy from my father was, say, 82nd Airborne. I grew up in North Carolina,
right? But
primarily did 4 years of high school in the Midwest, and between Chicago and Milwaukee, because my father was a machinery salesman. And after my gig in high school, I did a little stint with Sammy Davis out west, and then I came back and went to Florida. And people are like, "Well, how does a guy from the Midwest just show up and all of a sudden jumped into the crowd and start being one of the gang?" Well, simply because the guy that I went down there with, sister was married to the guy that owned the only fish house on the island. He was a native. He ran the fucking joint. So they knew him, they knew his sister, so his brother and his buddy's friend must be cool too.
Yeah, right.
And we were accepted right into the family. That's why I got down there, and I didn't have a job right away, or I didn't even go down there with any aspirations of hauling pot. You just hear the rumors is all it was.
Right.
Well, my buddy goes down there to work on a boat with Billy, and they had a guy from Michigan working with him that they didn't really want to know anything about. He didn't want him around. And I was helping to build their his sister's brand new house. And he said, well, if we get rid of this guy, can we get Timmy on board? Oh, yeah. So they worked this guy about a week and worked him to death, and he quit. And that's when I get on the boat. And that's when, you know, my first day, they imparted how it worked. You know, you get up at, you know, crack of dawn, you pull that first buoy, and then you work your ass off, and then blah, blah, blah. So I get out there, and my first day out on this boat, the sun's up, and the wheel bunks are in the wheelhouse, and I lean over and I look, and Captain Billy's got a big grin on his face. He goes, Timmy, he says, we're not going to pull stone crab traps today. He says, buddy, we're going to hang out here all day long and screw around and fish and goof off and unload a pot boat from Colombia later on tonight. And that was my initiation to this thing. 15 tons was the first time bush boat I ever unloaded. And the second day going to work, same thing. We didn't pull traps. 22 tons.
When's the first day you got like the cash in your hand? You were like, when you like got a chunk of cash,
a week after we did those 2 back-to-back jobs, I got paid at that time what was called rookie pay. I got $5,000 a night. But, and I thought, score, man. You know, I mean, I got 10 grand. That's a year's salary. Sure. You know, in those days for a blue collar worker. And I had given up a machinist job that I learned out of high school to come and do this. But skipping forward now that the captain knew he had a crew that was willing and able to do the work, now I'm getting paid according to the size of the load. I'm making anywhere from $15,000 to $75,000 to $100,000 a night, and we're working 2-3 nights in a week and shit like that. But skipping forward again till now, George is knocking on my door wanting, okay, get back to work. So I get everybody and I put everybody back to work, and we changed the program a little bit. I had one of my dearest friends was a National Park Ranger who was on my crew. Really? He introduced me to the government, their U.S. government's counter surveillance technologist, who was a Cuban guy in Miami who was selling them their work, their hardware. I was buying better, as good as, if not better, equipment they were buying because our war chest was so much bigger. Yeah, I had night vision, which was just coming into play at that time. It wasn't a full-fledged FLIR, infrared. It was starlight scope, and that was coming out of the Vietnam era. But they were still, they worked perfectly. We had parabolic microphones that you could hear 3 miles down the shoreline. If a guy was sitting in the bushes and farted, you could hear 3 miles down the shoreline, and shit like that. Polaris scanners, which you're probably familiar with, when you key it, all you have to do is key the mic, and the diode would point to exactly what direction that key came from. So we didn't have to talk. We could just go, okay, he's over there, because we're running dark at night, and shit like that. Yeah, right. Well, they approach me. I go to Colombia for the first time. I buy the load. I get it in. We start working, and now what's important is, and I noticed this when it's stored, or I keep forgetting
store. Yeah,
store.
Captain Store.
Forgive me, Cap. If you're watching, Captain, forgive me.
Yeah,
I'm terrible with names, but
it's a tough one at the end.
He showed a picture of them standing with these bales out in front of the Collier County Courthouse, and they just like bags. They looked like giant white bags full of. They weren't compressed in any way. Right. Those in the original days were what we called pillow bales. They weren't compacted. They weren't the hard compacted bale that everybody knows today. Right. And the reason for that was because we were involved in the evolution of that bale. And quite simply, what was happening was those pillows that you saw they were standing next to a pile of, we don't know how many times have these things been handled before we get them. And some of them have got cuts in them. They're leaking. They're not compact. And there's buds and the seeds and the stuff. And during those days, and anybody grew up in those days knows it was seedy as shit, right. And it was a mess. So we'd unload these freighters onto our boat, bring the shit in and offload it onto the little boats. And we'd spend hours of that night cleaning and scrubbing and going with screwdrivers in the cracks and getting these seeds and shit out because it was a mess. And we finally wound up taking out rolls of Visqueen, lining the entire bed of the boat and duct taping it down. So when we got done with the load, there was no sweeping it in. I was literally sweeping the shit into piles and taking an ice shovel and throwing it overboard. And I probably dumped more shit out of my boots than any 50 men could smoke in their lifetime. It was just nasty. Yeah. So the adults, after a while, we just take this, plastic and, wad it up and put a heavy chain and an anchor on it and throw it overboard. Yeah. Clean, job done. But what wound up happening was at that time was the 80s. We're coming into the 80s, and the advent of the commercial and household trash compactors. You started seeing them on the commercials and shit. Well, they said, okay, here, wait a minute. They went and got these industrial compactors and went down there and said, look, here's what you fucking need to do. That's when they started putting small amounts in and compress it, put small amounts and compress it. Now the bales are coming out almost the same weight. They're using this. They're all the same size, because I mean, when they were those pillow bales, you could get them from 40 pounds to 110 pounds. I mean, it was no rhyme to reason. So now they're easier to stack.
Size,
size. And like, there's nothing to grab hold of.
Right.
So now they're all the same size, equal weight. And now because of their stackability and their movability and in order to do the job a lot more rapid, the weights became heavier, the pay became more, the jobs became bigger, and that's when we took over and we started doing things, in a different fashion by changing up the boats. We stopped using the well boats. We were using T-Crafts and the Morgan's boats. And every single boat that was used in every crew. Now there were 5 crews. There was Everglades, Goodland, Marco, Naples, and Pine Island. There's as few as 50 guys at the fewest on each crew. Now we're talking about 20, 40, 100 plus 150, 160 of these type of boats that aren't just parked in everybody's front yard. Yeah. They're in the garages, they're in barns, they're in hiding because the law enforcement's not stupid.
They're rolling.
They know that. Well, as a Marine Patrol officer, what these boats are obviously being used for. Right. But that being said, what we would do is we decided that I said, look, if we're using 235 horsepower Evinrudes, which at that time were the most powerful, most dependable engines that were available at that time. Everybody that had a T-Craft or a Morgan used an Evinrude 235. Why? Simply because we didn't work like the older generations. We didn't have 10, 15 different mechanics. You call your guy and he comes and works and wrenches on your shit. No, we had one mechanic. He had 4 guys working with him. And what we were actually doing was we were buying brand new Evinrudes with the crates. And between all the crews, we knew every backwater guy there was working out there between Everglades and Pine Island. And we would supply them with a brand new 235 Evinrude. They would break them in for us.
Okay.
And even the Mercury engines, sometimes the guys would prefer a Mercury because they're a workhorse. I mean, they take a lot of RPMs. Yeah. And it only takes between an Evinrude or a Mercury, 10 hours and it's considered broke in. But we would allow these guys to use the boat for 20, 25 hours, for whatever. And then, call Sammy and say, hey, he would send 2 guys, take that already broken in motor off, put it in a crate, hang a new one on it for that one to be broken into. Okay. So when somebody called and said, dude, I got a problem with this and that or whatever. And if it's not a matter of a fouled plug or a fuel line or fuel injection or a fuel filter or something like that, it was simply, if that fucker left you sitting, get it off of there and get a new one on there. Yeah. So Sammy would send 2 guys. We take that motor off and put hang a new one on there, already broken in.
Yeah, that's
because you can't hang a new motor on there. You'll blow it up.
Yeah.
So we were getting all these guys to break in motors for us and use one mechanic.
And a system.
Yeah, and that's all part of the sophistication of how it all took place. But ultimately, what wound up happening was, I was doing a 57,000-pound load with a crew in Pine Island. And a crew and my Everglades crew, I was going to split it into, half here and half here. Well, as it turned out, as the story goes, one of the guys that was working on our crew was one of the well-known family members of Everglades City. I'm not going to say any names because it's not, I don't want to be, rude in that way. Only because even though they were responsible for what they were, I'm not sitting here. It's not my place to point a finger at anybody because, I'm happy with the way things turned out. Right. I got a life, but dude, I'm sitting in the same fucking room talking to you when I should be in prison for life, thank you for that much anyways, what wound up happening was, and my crew, when they're not expected to work, I don't give a shit what they're doing. They're off doing all kind of crazy shit. Even we were doing crazy shit just to spend money. We were taught how to spend money without having anything to show for it, and we come up with some really creative ideas.
That's crazy.
I mean, just unloading ungodly amounts of cash, just to get rid of it. But that being said, was he this one person in particular was in Colombia doing a job of his own, doing cocaine or some shit, and he got in trouble and got thrown in prison. U.S. government knew where he was from, knew he was part of the crew, went down there, made a deal with him, and got him out of that Colombian prison, put him right back to work with us.
Wow. That's
what he wound up working on was one of the chase boats we called. Chase boat is what we have now. I can give you pictures that correlate to a lot of this story when you go ahead and air this thing, which would be kind of cool because you'll understand this, what a chase boat looks like. And it's literally a go fast boat. In my case, it was a Chris Craft Scorpion with 200 horse Mercs on it, 400 horsepower that would do probably 70 miles an hour before your ass even hit the seat. When you're coming off for your mothership and into shore, you've got that 40 tons on there and you're moving 4 knots and your captain's busy. He's doing his job. He's on the radar and he's watching and he's, trying to make sure he knows where the boats that are working with us are. We're on the back of the load, opening one up, smoking one, trying to figure out if this shit's worth keeping some or not, because we'll tell the crew when we get back, hey, this is some good shit. You got to have some of this, right? Yeah. So he's dialed in doing his thing. And if it looked like we had 50-mile radius, and you're familiar with how they work, all the way down to 5 miles, and if that thing looks like it's going to approach you, we get on that chase boat and go off into the night and let him have the goddamn boat.
Yeah.
Because Billy didn't own it, his dad did. And the reason why the owners are never in the cars, trucks, vans, or boats is simply because if something like that does happen and it's real, we get on the radio and say, hey, call Huber, and the boat's gone. Huber would call the law enforcement or Marine Patrol at that time and say, look, I just looked out at the dock. My shit's gone. Boat's gone. That relieves him of any responsibility to what that boat or vessel or car or whatever's been involved in. Sure. And eventually, after it's been used for evidence, they get it back. Yeah. That was one of the, just the little secrets of the trade.
To do it. Yeah.
Well, the chase boats, we had a way to get out from offshore, but the guys driving back and forth in Miami all day long. I mean, there's cars and trucks. We're moving 40 tons of shit by daylight.
So you go across 41.
41.
Yeah, 41.
And
nothing
I told
else really there, right?
How else you got to get there?
Yeah,
exactly. There's only, and the thing about it was, there's only one way into Everglades City and one way out. There's one way to Miami from Everglades City. And that's what I told these investigators. I said, do you understand the geography? I said, they didn't send that shit over there on the backs of pelicans and fucking porpoises, man. They went down that one goddamn road. I mean, come on. And my guys are waving at you all the time. We're doing it, But all being said, what wound up happening was this, the guys driving have a way out as well. We have anywhere from, depending on the size of the load, 8 to 10 to 12 to 15, what we call spotter drivers that paid $5,000 a day to drive to that plaza and back to Everglades City in staggered formation all day long. Now, if you got stopped for any whatever reason, you're instructed to wait for whoever stopped you to get between their vehicle and yours, throw yours into reverse, and slam the holy shit out of this guy's front end. He's not going anywhere, but you're not going to outrun his radio.
Yeah.
So you need to haul ass and get out of sight of him, where one of these 15 spotters is already sitting, waiting to pick you up.
Right.
Leave it in the middle of the road and go.
Right.
Because by that time, the owner of that van, truck, or whatever's already called it in is stolen.
You guys got that down.
So he'll get his shit back.
Yeah.
And that's just how that worked.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Got your plans going.
We're splitting the load in Pine Island, and I decided to go and hang with the Pine Island crew because I hadn't worked a whole bunch with them. I knew the guys in Everglades. They knew what the hell they were doing. I didn't need to fuck with that. So we get up there, and and we're back off on Pine Island Road off of BFE, where nobody should be, and the locals know where this old roadway grown over back to this falling apart dock was in the middle of nowhere. That's where we're going to unload. And we pulled a box truck back in there to get it loaded, and we probably got maybe 60, 100 pieces. The boats were coming, we're unloading, we're like this, and all of a sudden they stopped coming, and the chatter on the radio stopped. And the guy, I get spotter out by the road, gets on the radio and goes, Timmy, he says, a car just pulled in here that, backed out and turned around and went back the other way. And I'm thinking, man, that ain't right.
Yeah.
Nobody should be out here, man. That ain't right. So I walked up there, I walked, through the trees to get up there. And as soon as I got out there, I said, okay, what, tell me. So as he's imparting to me again, I look behind me, and everybody that was back by the water is now standing behind me because they know this shit ain't right.
Yeah.
This guy didn't get 3 words out of his mouth trying to explain to me about the car that he saw come in here. And you could hear what sounded like 25 vehicles coming down the road, man. The tire noise.
Right.
And all of a sudden you could see the headlights. There was trees, but you could see the headlights in the road. Now, if you ran this way, there was a pine tree forest that you could just haul ass and go, tear ass and go. If you ran this way, there was about 3 acres of palmetto brush that wasn't any higher than 4 feet that you had to crunch in your way through. And I got surprised. I mean, I was already standing on the palmetto side of it. And they jumped on us so quick that everybody took off running toward the trees. I took off running to the palmettos. Dude, I didn't get from here to the doorway. I didn't get 15 feet. And now they were crunched down there, pulling in, and they're yelling, "There's guys running over there. There's guys running over there. We'll go get them." I was squealing, and everybody's running after everybody, And I'm sitting here listening to the show. I'm 15 feet away from this guy in a tan Bronco, and I'll never forget it because we saw that very same tan Bronco cruise around the parking lot of the hotel where we all met. And I'm thinking, oh, Christ, okay, here we go, So, but I could see under the bushes, I could see this guy's feet. And it's still a little bit dark out. Sun's coming up in about an hour, and I got to figure some shit out because I'm right there. If the sun comes up, they're going to see me, man. There's no hiding, right? So I could see the guy's feet. As soon as he'd open that Bronco door, the interior light would come on. I could see his feet. He stepped out and looked around and got back in, and he backed out and drove off. A couple minutes later, now a car pulls up out front in the roadway, and I can hear this car. Back comes the Bronco, and this guy's in it winds up being David Waller, the guy that I mentioned to you, and I name him by name in the book. Yeah, the FDLE agent who ultimately became friends of mine. We were working on an 8-series mini documentary with Prime when he passed away in November. But that aside, he gets out of the Bronco, shuts the door, and the guy out in the road, I can hear him yelling, "Where you going, man? What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm going to walk back in there and see what we got." And the guy in the road says, "Hang on, I'll go with you." Score. I'm thinking these two assholes are going to walk off into the woods, man. I'm gone. But the car was still running in the road, and now it's light out. Now I got to go. I got to do something. And I'm thinking, if I look up over those bushes and there's somebody still sitting in that car, one of two things is going to happen. He says, I'm gonna tackle and beat the shit out of this motherfucker or run, or he's gonna grab me, catch me, shoot me, or some shit like that. I put my head up like that. There was nobody in it. Boy, I took off like a shot, man, and I went across the road and in the bushes, and I ran till I couldn't breathe. I don't even know how far I ran. Dude, I dove under a tree. I covered myself up with branches and bushes and all kinds of shit, and I laid there all day long listening to the helicopters going over and the shit going on out a mile or so away from me, and they're dragging my box truck out of the trees. I can hear the branches banging against the empty sides of it and shit. And I laid there all day long. It's just starting to get dark, and I'm doing this, falling asleep, and I got all this covering on me, and I hear this crunching like footsteps. And I'm thinking, well, I laid there for long enough, and I've been there all day, and nobody saw me, so nobody chased me. So I open my eye like this, and I look over, and there's a fucking bobcat.
Oh shit!
80 pounds if this bitch was a pound, and it was an arm length away from me, doing this, sneaking up on me because it saw my eyes doing this, all it could see. And all of a sudden, now I go thinking to myself, you know what, motherfucker? I spent the night, getting away from the law, running my ass off, only to get eaten by this damn thing. And I'm thinking, no fucking way. So all I could think to do was come busting out of the leaves and scream as loud as I could. And that goddamn thing, it shot 3 feet in the air, turned 3 somersaults, and took off like it was shot out of a cannon. Funniest thing I ever saw. That's when I decided it was starting to get dark. I'd walk my way out by the road, walk off the road, 3 miles down the road to a fish house. And, at that time, of course, no cell phones.
See what happens then.
And I get to the fish house. They're still open. It's like 2:30 in the morning. Yeah. And out in the parking lot is the only telephone booth that there is. And there's lights on in the fish house. And I'm thinking, okay, there's somebody still here. Now, how in the hell am I going to get out to that phone booth without somebody seeing this one guy in the middle of the night? And this, my luck, here comes these 2 shrimp boats pulled in and unloaded their catch, and all the guys on the boats lined up with the phone to call for their ride home. That's when I got in line.
Nice.
Called a cab, and he came and got me and took me to a hotel room, and that was, that got me out of there. But then it wasn't a week or so afterwards came the investigations and David and his
Your
guy
name was all over it.
yeah, I was what was
Yeah.
considered managerial.
Yeah, there
You know,
go.
and
Yeah.
my 4 indictments totaled 160 years mandatory to life and $16 million in fines.
Wow.
And a very particular sequence of events needed to take place in order for me to be having this conversation, which you're going to get right out of here.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of story that I tell on different podcasts and, you know, and even the cast such as yours that, you know, there's 30 years of storytelling to tell, and I just didn't have the room in the book to do it.
Yeah, I know. We sit here for, it's been an hour and 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just getting started.
Like, yeah,
man.
I knew you get going. Let's do this. In a nutshell, where are you at today, real quick,
Okay.
and then we got to wrap it up a little bit. But
sure,
nutshell, where you're at today, why you're doing what you're doing, and you know, maybe you talking to people and how it impacts you.
Right. No, absolutely.
2 or 3 minutes.
I totally get you. And I'll start off by saying one of the reasons that I chose to write the book and that the older generations and I had gotten together and with their nod of approval, you know, because like I said earlier, I would never disrespect anybody by saying something or involving them in something that, you know, that they didn't agree to. Well, we all agreed that, you know, somebody should tell this story and somebody ought to tell it who was there, who knows the whole in and out, and can tell it truthfully and honestly without embellishment, because what embellishment would do, it would do 2 things. First of all, it would sound so ridiculous that it wouldn't be, you know, it would just, people wouldn't pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, it would put it beyond the realm of human possibility. And that's the edge on which we were working, right on the edge of human possibility to do what it is we were doing. So that being said, what I like people to understand is how this industry could have been done in a non-violent fashion and done by families and kids and generations of families and kids throughout the Caribbean. When having had a conversation 6 years ago with the supervisor for Homeland Security for South Florida and told him that, how does it feel having taken that industry out of the hands of people that never fired one fucking shot at you? Look what it's turned into now. You know what he had to say to me? I wish they'd just legalize it.
There's a lot of people who say that.
This was 7 years ago. Yeah. But what ultimately wound up happening, and what I like to have people take away from this book, is not only that, you know, the nonviolent nature in which this industry could be done. And what I also like them, because they now have a legal choice to make.
Sure.
You know, do I want to try cannabis? Do I want to try it for recreational purposes, or do I want to try it for a medical issue or medical purposes? You now have the legal right and the legal choice to do that. What's going to be your basis for that choice? Is it going to be the death and the mayhem and destruction that you're seeing taking place on the Mexican border, which, by the way, was the result of having taken it out of South Florida's hands,
right,
and given to the cartels in Mexico, because they didn't want the Caribbean weed. Mexico wanted to sell their own.
Right.
So when in the early 90s, when they just did away with us, Caribbean marijuana now went to North Africa and into Europe. That's where that market went. The Sinaloa, they've been around forever. Nothing new about these guys. Gallardo, who was the founder of the beginning of all the cartels in Mexico. They could grow the poppy for the heroin. They could grow the marijuana, but they couldn't grow the coca plant. So they had to get the cocaine from Colombia. And when Escobar got killed, that's when Gallardo went down there and took over, and now you had to buy your shit from him. That started the whole mess on the border. You want to, and then I told this guy from Homeland Security, I said, look, when you said legalize it, I said it, you know, he said, how would you I asked him straight out, I said, please tell me in you know, as honestly as you can, what percentage of success do you think with regards to interdiction of marijuana on the southern border is? What do you think your success rate is in percentage? And he didn't hesitate. He said, maybe 1%. Wow. And I said, thank you. I said, that lets me and everybody else know exactly you're not making a dent in it. So he says, well, how would you stop it? And I said, we'll legalize it. I said, you show a picture of a medically graded bud, you know, all glistening in all its goodness. And now that they're beginning to understand that it has medicinal properties to it, even the United States government knew this in the 70s. they're still doing tests and growing it at the University of Mississippi, which is another story in itself. Or show them a picture of this poor Mexican guy who's got this bale on his back and he's trying to get to the Sonoran Desert practically dead and not getting it there in lieu of his family being held otherwise. Which do you think they would point at? They're going to point at this one, for Christ's sake. So legalize it and take the poof out of it, take the demand out of it, and give it to the people of the United States and allow them to make a profound choice finally.
Yeah. That's a huge, another topic for another day. Right. So, but yeah, that's a huge controversy right now.
Right.
I know I get into it, not so much in a negative way. I'm just concerned about the folks that, get the card and get the legalization of it for the improper reasons,
for the recreational aspect of it.
But that's like that. That's like that with any type of medication, right? So if you're on a medication and you're going to the doctor to get it in a illegitimate way, that's problematic.
If you're doctor shopping like they used to do for that,
right? Yeah, that's where I'm at.
No, and I understand that, and I do not disagree with that. But what I would like to, if I don't do it any other way, and I can't articulate it in any other fashion, then if you want to make this choice, what would you rather have going through your head? Would you rather know that by doing this, you're not contributing to what's taking place on our southern border? Because the cannabis that's being offered to you is grown here in the United States by people who care. You're not contributing to that market whatsoever. What I would like you to understand, what I would like you to know if you're trying it for the first time, is envisioning that cool Rasta guy standing out in 200 acres of virgin bud in his cutoffs and his dreads and just, having the time of his life, just, taking care of the crop and taking care of the bud. Or the little Colombian dude and his family in his white cotton hat and cotton blouse and cotton pants out tending the buds and doing, and taking care of nature in its own way. Would you rather have that homespun feeling of nonviolence, or would you rather have what's taking place?
Yeah, the violence is definitely a no-go.
And we proved through the writing of this book and the telling of this tale how it could be done for over 3 generations in a non-violent fashion. Now, only one time in all the years that I was involved in this as a kid and growing up and traveling the Caribbean and meeting all these different connections in Jamaica and Central America and Venezuela and working with Noriega 3 times. It's another story for another time.
Yeah, right.
But, and knowing that it can be done, I only saw a gun once. Only once did I ever put a gun in my hand. And that's only because the first time I went to Colombia, this crazy boss man that I went with, who was a card. I mean, the guy was hysterical. I mean, he was just really a jolly old guy, so there's nothing cartel whatsoever about him. It's just that it was human nature for them to grab a gun when you left the house.
Yeah, that's it.
But that being said,
Tim, I really appreciate it coming in and giving us another perspective. I take it from a law enforcement perspective. So you coming in and just telling us how it is, and again, we could go for hours. It's great.
Oh yeah.
But your information, I can't thank you enough. It's been great.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, always welcome into the studio.
Thank you for giving me opportunity to rebut.
Yeah, it's been great. No, it's been great. Yeah, no, and Captain Store, I know he appreciates it. He's been around. He's a professional, so he knows, how everything goes. So yeah.
And like I said, and I don't know if I said it on, before the show started, I have nothing but utmost respect for our law enforcement and the agencies in which were involved in my arrest, because ultimately, they did the fair thing. They did the right thing, by us, by giving us the opportunity to not spend the rest of our lives in prison for something that they were, over a battle that they were losing, and they knew they were losing it.
No, I know. And
I thank you sincerely.
No, it's great. And thank you for calling and getting in. All right, 239 Uncensored, everything Southwest Florida and beyond. And let's get this Saltwater Cowboy book. Let's get it.
Amazon.
Amazon, Audible.
Yeah.
That's a great way to do it.
There's
if you're
a
driving.
Kindle.
Yeah, it's great.
The guy who does the Audible did mostly Stephen King's work. He's a very cool dude.
Yeah,
so I think you'll love it.
Again, thank you. All right, we're going to be out, so we get a little fist bump in the middle. We are
Here we
out.
go, man.
All right.
Take care, y'all.
Good.